Hello everyone and welcome back to some more Nomifactory, where today I think it's finally time to create our first MV line of power, and to also expand out the platform so we can actually do that, because the LV machines have taken us far enough, but now we need to actually get MV power and machinery in order to continue. Although from the looks of things, we're pretty close to auto-crafting already, so I might just literally detour to that instead and get that set up, because I really don't want to have to keep using the work tables here. I think to start out with, we'll expand the platform out further that way, and then we'll also start to go and search for meteors, since we need one more inscription plate in order to progress. I find a whole ass ocean monument before I can even find a meteor, man. Please don't give me mining fatigue while I set this waypoint. Oh, finally, logic press. Oh, thank God. It was starting to take so long to find this damn logic press that I was worried I might actually have to go through the crafting process instead. So in order to get automation set up, there's a couple machines we're going to be needing. The first thing we're going to need is crafting units so that the system actually has like the memory or processing power to actually craft everything. The next thing, which actually isn't shown in the questline surprisingly enough, is molecular assemblers. These are the things that actually process your crafting recipe, so that way if you have like sticks or something, it can be processed through here. While they do craft the items, they don't actually pull items from the system, and that's where an ME interface is going to come into play. So this block has quite a few uses, but the main two things we're worried about is the ability to pull items out of the system, and it also gives us the ability to put crafting patterns inside of the actual interface. Okay, so it's actually called a blink pattern. Either way though, you use these to encode recipes like into actual patterns, which you can then place into the interface. And the point of the interface is to actually provide items, at which point it actually expects a return for the recipe. So if we output 2 torches and we're expecting a diamond hammer back, if we don't get that diamond hammer back, the recipe will be constantly going in the system. Which is why it's incredibly important when we encode these patterns that we actually do everything properly, because otherwise the system will just get completely stuck and then we have to cancel the recipe. If we don't have literally one of these things, then we actually can't do it. And that's actually another thing we need, which is a pattern it's a pattern terminal. And we need this so that way we can actually encode the patterns. From the looks of things as well, we should be able to craft everything here except for the blank pattern. Molecular assemblers require things that are basically just MV tier. The same thing with the interface as well, because this is just more MV tier components. The reason why we can't really craft the blank patterns is because it requires tier 3 circuits as well as polyethylene sheets. Okay, maybe I was like a little optimistic to actually get auto crafting this quickly. So, unfortunately, to get either of those, we need to go through quite a bit of the questline here, especially for the polyethylene. Tier 3 circuits are fairly simple since we mainly just need to get the circuit wafers to actually get there, because if we look at the recipe, it requires 16 fine electrum wire, 4 tier 2 circuits, 2 resistors, 2 capacitors, integrated circuits, which is what we need the silicon boules for, and lastly, aluminum plates, and then it just gives us only one. So pretty much every tier 3 circuit requires 12 tier 1 circuits, since you need 3 of them for 1 tier 2. The main new thing here though is the integrated circuit, which you basically just need a cutting machine to actually cut up the wafers you get. And you get an integrated circuit wafer by throwing a silicon wafer through a precision laser engraver. And you have to make sure you're using specifically the red lens, because otherwise it won't actually give you the correct wafer. Because if you throw this in with any lens, it'll do different recipes. Continuing though, to actually get silicon wafers, we need silicon boules, which requires silicon dust and tiny piles of gallium dust in a blast furnace. Well, if anything, let's get the silicon boules crafted up so we can at least have that slowly processing in the background. Do I have any silicon? Okay, I do have silicon in my system. Alright, well let's take the energetic alloy out of here and start actually crafting up those boules. Since the crafting recipe time for silicon boules is literally 300 seconds, I think we should finally start getting that MV line set up here. So to start out with, we're going to need a new CEF, and I'm going to make sure to make a 16x since we used a 4x here, which we only really needed it for this one MV machine. For right now, the two main machines we want to make for the line is the cutting machine and the precision laser engraver, so we can actually progress towards like tier 3 circuits. But it's also pretty important that we also make the electrolyzer, since we need this for stainless steel. And we also need to make the extruder, which we're going to need so we can actually get towards polyethylene. Well, let's get those machines crafted up so we can get closer to our tier 3 circuits. And only after a little bit of time we've got all 4 machines crafted. Something I'd like to point out, by the way, is the type of cable that I'm using for both the MV and the LV line here, which is primarily the fact that they're lossless cables, or the fact that even though they're traveling this far, like this many blocks away from the CEF, they don't lose any energy whatsoever. Normally, GregTech cables actually lose power over time, like as they continue to progress, like copper cables for instance, they have a loss per block of 1. Thankfully we have lossless cables though, so we don't have to worry about that here, and instead of using conductive iron, you use energetic alloy for the MV. Even further on, like later on for HV power, you would use vibrant alloy, I believe? Yeah, vibrant alloy cables have a loss per block of 0, and that's your lossless cable for HV. Thankfully, while we were crafting all of those machines, a couple of our silicon boules have actually processed, and that should be a quest. So the next step in the process after getting the boules is actually cutting them down into wafers, which we're going to need quite a bit of water for that to actually cut them down, so we'll just steal it from our endervor here. And now here in the cutting machine we can use our water and silicon boules and they'll slowly be cut down into wafers. And thankfully this is significantly faster than the actual creation of silicon boules. Now the next step in the process, actually converting the wafers into integrated circuit wafers, we need a red lens, which we actually haven't crafted up yet. Thankfully, this is an incredibly simple recipe. We just need to throw ruby into an autoclave, which we should have. We actually don't have any ruby smelted up. I'm fairly certain we have, like, the ore, though. There's no way. Yeah, we have the ore. So step 1 is to smelt it up. And then step 2 is to actually throw it into the autoclave. Now that we have this red lens, we can take out the wafers from the cutting machine and just throw them straight into the precision engraver. And thankfully, the placement of the lens, like in here, doesn't matter. It's the same thing for the circuit in the assembling machine over there as well. Unfortunately, this recipe does take quite a bit longer than the actual cutting process. And now with our very first wafer, we can just cut it straight down into the actual integrated circuits we need, which actually takes forever. Holy shit, it takes a whole ass minute. And just like that, we've got our integrated circuits. With these, we can finally craft our tier 3 circuits, but I am worried about the amount of aluminum, or aluminium, that we have. As things currently stand, we have a bare 14 and only 230 dust, and it'll take forever to smelt all of that up. After we get those circuits crafted up, I think we're going to have to switch gears to crafting a lot more blast furnaces. When we began LV, we could only really power one blast furnace, and even then it took quite a bit, or practically all of our power just to get it. But at this point, with the amount of power we produce, we can definitely support more than one. And not only that, but once we start getting this expanded even more, we can just have an entire row of just blast furnaces. So in order to automate our aluminium, what we could do is we could use the DML mob processing in order to do it with Guardian Matter. But the route I'm going to be taking is actually using the clay dust, which we had earlier on. Because with this recipe, we also produce sodium, silicon, and lithium. And the most important part is definitely that sodium, or silicon rather. And in order to get clay, all we really need to do is actually just throw in the one clay block that we can easily produce from the chemical reactor into a macerator. Well, it's finally time to circle back to tier 3 circuits, and I think I should batch craft a shit ton of them, considering the fact we're going to need a lot of them for the machines. The main things we really need the tier 3 circuits for right now is a distillation tower, MV assembling machine, and a multi-smelter. As well as the blink patterns as well. Time to craft a bajillion circuits. Unfortunately, I forgot to record a good chunk of the crafting bits, so unfortunately the montage isn't nearly as long. So after a bit of time, we finally craft up 5 tier 3 circuits. While I did say earlier I was going to batch craft, I figured it would be best if I actually didn't do that, considering we were going to get a better recipe pretty quickly. And another thing, there should have definitely been a quest for that, but unfortunately the MVCEF-like thing, you need an energy input hatch for that. It's not a CEF apparently. So let's just quickly get this thing crafted up so we can at least get the quest, so I can get like a bajillion at once pretty much. Okay, yeah, there was definitely quite a few quests that I needed to get. We need to get all of the lenses. I knew that thankfully similar to the ruby lens, the diamond lens and the glass lens are pretty simple to make. You just literally need one diamond and one glass in order to make them. So first up the diamond lens, and now the glass lens. So unfortunately we didn't get the circuit wafers quest either, which requires both RAM and RAM wafers. Okay. So in order to create RAM wafers, we just need to use a diamond lens on our silicon wafers. Thankfully, this ruby recipe is still processing, so it should be more than easy enough to get that. And we need one and just one RAM. Thankfully, it crafts 32 from one wafer. The joy of waiting for the laser engraver. And finally, our first RAM wafer. I'll make sure to get the red lens like thingamabob set right back up afterwards. And now we can get this cut. And I'll make sure to place the circuit wafers in here as well. We want to get those cut up afterwards. And finally, we can get our RAM. And thankfully with that out of the way, we've nearly gotten all of the quests knocked out except for the MV extruder. I still need to get that large pipe extruder shape made, but apart from that, we desperately need to start getting chrome, and I probably should have started batching this up earlier on. The recipe chain we're going to take to get chrome is going to be by electrolyzing ruby dust. And in order to get as much chrome as we possibly can, I'm going to make an MV macerator so we can get the chance output at chrome when we macerate crushed ruby ore, as well as when we actually macerate ruby ore, because I'm hoping that we actually get the byproduct of chrome. I feel like there's a decent chance GregTech just fucks me here and gives me stone dust as my byproduct until I get HV power. So in order to craft an MV macerator, all we really need to get at this point is more tier 2 circuits, an MV machine hole, a piston, and a new steel buzzsaw blade. Okay, well we can already craft that. That was easy. Alright, now with these 2 circuits, we can craft up our MV macerator. Not a quest, unfortunately. Considering the fact we don't have any more energetic alloy, I think I'm going to replace the extruder for the macerator here so we can place our crates above it, and we'll just place the extruder here for now. Well, I suppose it's time to slowly let the ruby process, and while that's processing, I think I'm going to start up some aluminum or aluminium in the background. The joys of 5 billion second craft times. While we wait for the ruby to process in the macerator, I figured we should start getting our blast furnace line set up here. While we don't exactly have the materials to supply them to keep them running, we can at least get it set up so when we do have passive processing, it'll just be ready. We're going to need at least one for the aluminium to be constantly processing, but we'll also want another one for silicon boules, and we'll also want another one for energetic alloy. Well, let's quickly batch up some blast furnaces. So while I was able to make 2 blast furnaces completely, I don't really have enough resources for the last one. Well, specifically nickel, at least. Although what you probably will notice about the 2 furnaces we do have set up is that they're not exactly separated. So GregTech has a feature where basically you can have multi-blocks share blocks with each other, so that way like they could still function and it takes up less resources. The main issue with doing this type of setup though is that it can be quite difficult to set up 4 hatches, because you can set up like an input, output, and a fluid input hatch. But having an output hatch is really difficult because you basically don't have the space for it, because these 3 slots here between the 2 furnaces, you can't use that. You can only use the center 3, and like you can only use like the pretty much just any centerpiece really. So for an ingot like annealed copper, it just needs oxygen for the input and it doesn't actually have an output, so you can actually just do that for the hatch. And yes, that does mean I changed my mind. The 2 resources that we're going to be doing automatically is going to be aluminium in this first one, and then annealed copper in this second one. When we expand later on, we'll start getting our silicon boules and energized alloy and all that. So here in a couple minutes, once I've got the energized alloy smelted up, I'll get the cables hooked up here, and then the next thing we need to do is start getting these automated so we can actually get the resources. Which means we're definitely going to have to overhaul this LV system here so it can support even more, so we're going to probably get a 16x CEF here. Because I want to have another setup here for clay, so that way we can start macerating it and getting clay dust, and then we'll have that electrolyzed at the very top. And then we'll have the system access it through a drawer controller, like probably towards the a middle path here, since we're going to have ME conduits. And then it'll travel on the ME conduits, and then we'll have an ME interface here to actually export everything into the furnaces. First things first, we get our energetic cables. Now the next thing we need to make is Fluix conduits, well, more specifically the ME conduits. Then, after the ME conduits, we need to get our LVCEF and cables. So now that we've got all of these cables crafted up, the next thing we need to do is start getting up the actual clay maceration line. And in order to set up this line, we're going to need 4 macerators to actually get to dust, and then we're going to need the clay to be macerated. We're going to need 1 chemical reactor to actually produce the clay, and then we're going to finally need an electrolyzer to actually get the aluminum dust. Along with those machines, we're going to need a cobblestone generator and a drawer controller so we can actually access all of the drawers with the storage network. And finally, after a decent amount of time, we have our entire electrolyzer set up. I did have to mildly redesign some of the conduits in the back for this drawer controller setup here. And that's mainly because we can draw out of the drawer controller itself, since that basically acts as a main network hub. Essentially, this drawer controller reads the contents of every single drawer in this network, which is basically just every drawer that connects to one another like this. Just blocks right next to each other. Either way, we can pull out of this instead of the actual pulsating dust drawer itself to insert the pulsating dust for our clay here in this alloy smelter. So if we look here in the back, you can see that it doesn't actually hook up there anymore. It just simply hooks up to the drawer controller itself. And you'll probably notice that the fluid conduits actually connect all the way back here for the chemical reactor too. And it looks absolutely horrendous. And you can also see that the electrolyzer goes up from the item conduit there and it'll insert into here. And I put it on black just in case if we connect it up to this conduit network here so it doesn't accidentally mess anything up, hopefully. With that out of the way, we'll now need to craft our first ME interface and ME storage bus. So the first thing to set up is the ME storage bus, which essentially just allows the ME network to actually interface with this drawer controller. And what that pretty much means is that if we actually go over here to the terminal, we can actually look inside and see our aluminium and silicon and all that we've processed. So all of the things in the drawers there we can see here. Something that's also important that we should do for this drawer here is I want to make sure that this is on extract only, because we really don't want to be putting more stuff into here. We only want to be taking things out of the drawers. Since the contents of those drawers can actually be accessed by the network now, we can actually use the ME interface to pull them from the network. The menu looks a little scary at first, but it's pretty simple. So the top part of the interface here is the part where you can actually interface with the system directly. When you place items in the top, which you can actually drag from JEI, it will pull items from the system. So if you have stone, for instance, it'll pull stone. When you click the item away from the top here, it will send all of the items back, since this is basically just throwing items into the system with the bottom bar here. Something important to keep in mind with the JEI thing as well is that you can only drag in one item at a time. So if you hold shift and scroll your mouse wheel, you can increase the amount that's there, so that way you don't have to have a stack of the item on you. The patterns section is more for auto crafting. The reason why the patterns only have one row here is because you need upgrade cards to actually get access to these 3 rows as well. Which is mainly what this sidebar here is for. It's just for upgrades. We'll go more in depth with auto crafting later on when we actually have the patterns, but for now, it basically just does your auto crafting. And then the 2 buttons on the left here, you have the interface terminal button on the bottom and a blocking mode button on the top. I recall blocking mode had something to do with buffer chests, but I don't exactly remember, so we're probably not going to be using that. The interface terminal was more important because what that basically does is it makes it so that the interface here, that it physically exists in the world, when you have an interface terminal, you can see every single interface that exists as long as this isn't clicked. If this is disabled, then you can't actually see it in the interface terminal, which is what we want, because when we're auto-crafting, we're going to be making big multi-blocks that we can't really see inside of. Trying to figure out which interfaces are the ones that you actually want to put your auto-crafting recipes into is a bit of a nightmare, so just disable them. If I recall correctly, you can also rename the interfaces in anvils, but that's just a lot of effort and XP. Either way though, since the interface can both pull items and put items back into the system, we're going to be pulling the aluminum out of the system into the input bus here, and then we're going to be inserting it right back into this interface here. So now the interface extracts on red with the aluminum, it goes into this input bus here, which then slowly gets cooked up, and then after a bit of time it will get exported from this one back into the system. The one fatal flaw with doing something like this is that it will always run. It never stops. So in order to keep the blast furnace from producing too much aluminum, what we're going to need to do is make a level emitter, and we're also going to need to make a machine cover. And the cover we need is a machine controller specifically, because if you use a redstone signal, you can turn it on or off. Thankfully, the machine cover is pretty easy to craft. Unfortunately though, the level emitter is a little bit more of a difficult craft because of the stainless steel rod here. In the meantime, while we don't have stainless steel, what we can simply just do is use a lever to disable the machine. And now you can see in the top left there, it'll say working disabled, but the actual block itself will still be green. While the lever is great as a temporary measure, we really need to get that stainless steel rod. And in order to do so, we need to finally start crafting stainless steel, which is going to be using up that chrome we were crafting earlier. Although it mainly uses iron, some nickel, manganese, and chrome, which I don't actually have yet. So as it turns out, all of the ores I need in order to get manganese, I literally just don't have them. Unfortunately, our lever's just going to have to stay here. I think I'll keep it flicked on though, since we really don't burn too much from just leaving it. And we badly need the aluminum anyways. Another big problem we're starting to slowly run into is that we don't really have many resources, or at least many of the more specific ones. Like for instance, one of them would be nickel. We have a couple stacks of nickel in here, but we're slowly running out. Definitely redstone too, since it only has 192. We also just need to go mining for more ruby, because we were able to get around a stack and some chrome, but it's not really enough for the amounts, like the volumes we'll need for HV. Especially considering the fact that our next quest here is a distillation tower, or at least very soon it's a distillation tower, so we can actually progress. Alternatively, if I don't want to use the distillation tower, there is a setup where I can use a distillery and a brewery in order to do ethylene, which is probably what I'm going to be doing. But I'd still like to be able to batch craft a bunch of stainless steel, since we're really going to need a lot of it for this tower here. To be honest, I think today's going to be a bit shorter of a video than normal. The time it's going to take for me to go down the polyethylene path here to finally get better circuits and auto-crafting is just going to take a really long time. So all in all, I think it'd be best if I just move polyethylene next episode, so that way we can have everything bundled up together. For sure though, next episode is definitely going to be auto-crafting day. Either way though, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.